Previously on Tales from Tech Titans. How did you know it was time to move on from ANZ?
I was walking through Bangalore Airport. I tripped over and I had a major injury as a result. Ended up having to take several months off to try and look at non-surgical options. Ended up having major surgery. Took another 3 months off to recover from the surgery. When I came back into the office, there was a restructure. I'm like, you can deal me out, please. I want to go and do something else.
Most tech startups suffer with indigestion, not starvation.
Yes.
And that kind of really pricked my curiosity, because I was just trying to, meeting people like yourself, it's just interesting how you navigate through that.
That was a very hard-earned lesson that I wish we'd known earlier. If you could change one thing about your industry, what would it be?
How did you know it was time to move on from ANZ?
I was walking through Bangalore Airport. I tripped over and I had a major injury as a result. So I tripped over a damaged part of my spine, came back to Australia and ended up having to take several months off to try and look at non-surgical options. Ended up having major surgery, took another 3 months off to recover from the surgery. And whilst I was lying in bed recovering, or actually getting ready for the surgery, I was like, when was the last time I was happy in my job? And it was when I was running that security program I mentioned before. Good people, very clear ownership, very clear problem, really highly engaged team. And I had got to the point at ANZ where, without trying to be dismissive of my own role, it was steering committees and more than anything else. I'm like, running a large team, I felt that I didn't have the ability to really influence the way I wanted to. At a technical level, I wasn't loving the job. I thought, I've got to do something different. So when I came back into the office, there was a restructure. I'm like, you can deal me out, please. I want to go and do something else.
Yeah, great.
And I didn't know what that something else was. I was looking around and I was considering, do I want to try the civil service? And then I met someone who said, I've got an idea for a startup, but I don't know how to make it happen. Do you want to come on that journey? I'm like, hell yeah. When are you going to get that opportunity? So it's an interesting thing. Often we think about startup as things that you do when you're in your 20s. Yeah. You don't do them when you're in your 40s, when you've got 2 kids at private school. But this is an opportunity that I've left ANZ by choice because I want to go and do something different. This is the something different. And what's the worst that could happen? I could give this a crack. We could not get funding. And so in 6 months, that redundancy money is going to be gone and I'm going to have to go and get a real job. Okay, that's fine. Or it might work and we go for a year and a half and then I have to go and get a real job. Okay. Or it works and I can retire and I can teach people how to build robots, and that sounds great too. And so I thought, I'm going to leap on that as an opportunity. So it was more that I had just reconsidered where I was at with my life. Yeah. And thought that's what I want to change.
That's an incredible moment. It took that accident situation for you to get that time to pause, to reflect, because it's very easy to be on the train.
Yep.
Not really knowing where the stations are, and you're just kind of going and going and going, and you've become the victim of your own success by the sound of it, because you're moving into bigger roles and probably away from what you really enjoyed and what you were passionate about.
Yep. Into
this kind of bureaucracy, only because you were so good at what you did.
And there was conversations about, would you be interested in this role and this role? And I ended up at the end saying, I'd love that job. It's a transformation job. It's really hard. And it's like, no, there's someone earmarked for that role. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
And it was an interesting point when you go, I'm okay with calling time here. I've loved my time here.
Yeah.
I loved the people I worked for. I had some great bosses. At the end, I worked for a guy called Gary Strain, who I think actually now is retired to become an academic. He was great as a boss. I had some incredible peers on my leadership team who've now gone on to run some of the big consulting firms and are divisional CIOs at other Big Four. Like, there were some great people that I worked with. But it was time. And it's the interesting thing that I often say to people who are trying to deal with some major event in their life. That was a horrible year of my life, dealing with the injury and the ramification and like ongoing pain and so forth. But I wouldn't take it back, because what it led to me was a really real clarity about what I wanted to do with my life. Mm-hmm. That's not to say I won't ever go back to a Big Four, but I really became very clear about what I did and did not want out of my life. And so it became much more much more focused on achieving kind of a really high level of alignment of values and enjoyment and love of what I did.
Yeah, that's interesting. Obviously, you mentioned that you then went to a startup. Interesting, actually. I was reading something recently, and it said a startup with a founder who's 50 is something like 20 times more likely to succeed than a startup with someone that's 20. The Mark Zuckerbergs are the anomalies of this world. So it's interesting when you kind of talk about coming at later in life into a startup, because you've got all that experience. You've seen so many things. What in being in that environment, what do you think is the secret to success for a tech startup?
Yes. Just say yes.
Yeah. Yes to everything?
Yeah, almost. When you start a startup, you have a product idea. We had a product idea. It's a great product idea. We were 3 years late to market. The Apple Wallet effectively crucified us before it had even launched. By the time we got there, the product was wrong. But we kind of walked in and said, right, we've got this one product idea. We don't know if that's going to work. So as we build it, and this is how I tend to think about a lot of things, let's not build for that individual problem set. Let's build the tool that allows us solve that problem. And so we were looking at one stage around, we're in the card space around payments, and we were looking at controls. And controls are, do I allow international transactions and so forth? Yep. And my head of engineering, a guy called Chad Harris, he had the notion, I'd love to claim credit for it, but it was Chad who said this. Chad said, well, rather than hard coding them, we should just make that a script. We're building this in Clojure. Clojure's really good for script decisioning. We should do this in script so that if transaction is from one of these countries, then block. I'm like, that's a brilliant idea. So he built the engine, and the engine was script-based. Well, once you have that engine, all of a sudden you can start to do anything you want to any transaction. You can interrogate it in any way. You can take any action. And so we architected this really, really simple idea of, I have a thing, it meets some conditions, I take an action. Like really basic building block stuff. But because of that, when the original product didn't succeed the way it wanted to, we were able to say, well, we can use that to start doing things like charity roundups and real-time discounting and build your own card, because I can turn on and off all of the features of the card. So if you go to banks in the Middle East now, most of them have build your own card capability. Well, that was us. We built that, took it out to the Middle East, got implemented, hugely successful, hugely engaging. But it was all of this idea that we weren't trying to build the problem, a software to solve the individual problem. We built a tool set that solved some other stuff. And I also then stepped out of the technology role, and the founder, who had a very specific idea, like, well, I think there's a whole lot more we can do with this. So I'm going to start managing the product as well. And then one day I think I just changed my signature file as well to say Chief Technology and Product Officer. And so I started doing a lot of pre-sale stuff and working with our customers to develop potential new products. And they would say, hey, can you do this? And because I designed the entire thing with Chad, I'm like, yeah, I can do that. And I was able to commit, and I'm like, get back to the hotel. Oh, Chad, I need you to build this thing. I'm doing a demo tomorrow. And I think that what made us able to keep on going was that flexibility to say yes and not to have hard restrictions, but also because everything we built was all about how do we operate as efficiently as possible with the smallest amount of resource that we've got. I think at our biggest, the engineering team got to like 10 people.
But so how do you, in that situation, because a lot of tech startups are overwhelmed with ideas, yet how they manifest those ideas, or they kind of they come into reality, or they over engineer those ideas, or they drag them out for too long beyond the point of viability. So how do you know when an idea has got legs and when you need to can it?
That was absolutely an ongoing discussion inside the business. We used to jokingly refer to our sales deck as the takeaway menu. Yeah. Because there was far too much in that. Yeah. Really, the company, and I have to say, so I left the company, I was there for 6 years, the company is still going. Yeah. So that in and of itself is a statistical miracle. Yeah. Particularly after some stuff that happened during COVID. But there was a lot on that menu, and progressively we learned that the customers really, really just focused, depending on who you were, focused on one or two things off that menu. And so we left a lot of the capability there, but not fully developed. I used to refer to it as, this is ready to show, this is ready to sell, this is ready to use.
Yeah.
And we would build everything ready to show, but do not go off the beaten path. Do not put unexpected data in there. Do not expect there to be error handling off this function. But it was a proof of concept. We could show that we could do that.
Yeah.
Ready to sell, I could give a working demo to someone and they could play with it because it had error handling. But it wasn't ready to use, whereas ready to use, it's self-recovery and everything else. So that curation, that was a real issue and a real sore spot within the organization. The sales guys wanted to have everything in their arsenal. But then progressively over time, we got to a point where actually maintaining this is going to start becoming really costly.
Yeah.
And so we really focused down onto a couple of key things.
I think, to summarize that, the quote I heard recently, and I forget where, but I'm not going to take credit for this, but it was most tech startups suffer with indigestion, not starvation.
Yes.
And that kind of really pricked my curiosity because I was just trying to, meeting people like yourself, it's just interesting how you navigate through that. But it sounds like it's a bit of suck it and see, to be honest with you.
It is. And our biggest learning was we were selling something that plugged into the payments infrastructure of a bank or to a credit card scheme. Those are hard places to integrate to. They're incredibly security conscious and they're problematic. We had one implementation that went for well over a year. And we were ready on, they signed the contract. We fully provisioned everything within 24 hours.
Yeah. And
it took them more than a year to integrate. And so I moved out of the tech role into a pure chief product officer role. And the first major new product that I developed, it started with the idea of how do I avoid, as a product constraint, how do I avoid needing to talk to corporate security? How do I avoid plugging into the infrastructure of the payment stuff? How do I get rid of everything that slowed us down? That product, which is now the product of the company, was around environmental awareness, education, real-time scoring, and around the impact a transaction has.
Yeah.
And the ability to do offsets in very public, verified carbon or environmental offset programs of your choice. And part of the build for that was you can sell this and go live within 2 weeks. And actually putting that in place. Now, that was not a thing at the time that everyone in the company was a fan of. They're like, no, we want this thing that locks us in for 5 years. And you're like, yeah, but those are hard to sell. And that really informing the product basis around what is a much easier sell was something that it took us years till we got to that point. Yeah, right. And that I think marked the turning point in the company.
Because that's almost your kind of minimal viable product, right? As in just to get something out there, being used, someone paying for it, and then get things moving beyond that point.
And it's now, that particular product's now in a dozen banks all across Southeast Asia. It's been really, really successful. And the implementations have been incredibly simple because it was specifically designed around, single API calls, and that's all you need to do. And it's that sort of thing that I think it's a shame we hadn't realized that earlier. In the company. That was a hard-earned lesson because we were all in love with the original idea and the idea of we're in this forever. But anyone who's ever put software into a bank knows that banks never rip software out. So even if it's a single API, you're probably in there for 5 years anyway. So it was kind of this thing of that was a very hard-earned lesson that I wish we'd known earlier.
It's you're making me think of all these quotes that I kind of come across, and I'm always curious, I guess, around learning. But one of the quotes is, fall in love with your customers' problems, not your solutions.
And early, we were definitely in love with our solution, and late in it, we were definitely in love with the customer. And so I've never heard that quote, but I love it. That really probably took us half the life of the company to make that change. Yeah,
fantastic. Going from ANZ to a startup, it's a complete different mindset as an individual. How would you recommend someone to set themselves up for success in that environment?
So I think the first thing is, I would say that almost anyone who's willing to make that leap can make that leap. I don't think there's any such thing as someone who is inherently a big company person and a startup person if you're willing to be. I think there's a certain mindset you've got to have in a startup, a certain flexibility that some people who get very comfortable in big companies probably couldn't do because they want a governance structure. If you're the sort of person who needs a governance structure, don't go into a startup. But if you're the sort of person who's driven by solving a problem for someone, startups are a brilliant place to be. And when I made the change, I walked in very motivated to do something different with my life. So I had no particular preconceptions about what my job would or would not entail. I had no problem doing everything from sales to architecture to running the website to, getting coffee or putting in cables under desks. I didn't care. And so I walked in with a very deliberately open mindset. But I think if anyone comes into a startup with that open mindset, you're already halfway there.
Yeah.
But I think the other thing is then to really focus on what is the minimum you need to do for something. I think too many people get used to the idea of, I've got this requirements document that's been given to me and I have to fully deliver to that. But the phrase that I've used for years with my teams is that a requirements document is the start of a conversation, not the end of one.
Yeah.
Because the person who wrote that had no idea what was involved in delivering it. So they wrote that in good faith. This is the things that I want. This is how I think it should work. But they don't know what's actually involved. They don't know that requirement number 6 is $1 million requirement. They've no clue. And they don't know that there's one line that made that hard, and they didn't mean to make that hard. And when you tell them, they're almost invariably going, oh, Christ, let's change that. And so I think if you're working with that open mindset and that willing to really cut down to what's core, then you're likely to be more successful in startups. But shocker, not just startups. I think that's an approach that we'll come to that you need to take far more broadly.
I feel like you've just distilled a requirements document down to being a horoscope. It's
to me, requirements documents, a well-written requirements document is one of the most important things that you can ever have.
Yeah.
But it needs to be clear, it needs to be concise, and it's not the document to me, it's the process. It's, have you thought through all of the permutations and combinations of this? Have you identified everything that needs to happen? When I was running the security project that I mentioned, I had a 2IC on the business side, Amy Thompson, who went on to have a great career as a chief product officer of her own company. She taught me about what it was to have good requirements. And on complex regulatory things, it's not the requirements that's the problem. It's the gotchas that are buried in the detail, and you have to think through all of the detail. But once you've thought through all of the detail, you need to go back and make your requirements really simple so they can be built cleanly and clearly with the desired amount of flexibility. But that requires a lot of brain power, not a lot of documentation.
Yeah.
And that walking out into a startup was, we have to think about the permutations and combinations. But for us, that involved an office that we used to joke had 30 meters of whiteboard but no printers. So what we would do is we would map through everything that we needed to do, take lots of photos of them, put them all up on our wiki, and then wipe it and go on to the next combination of them. But our documentation was really light. It was literally just photos of the whiteboards. But we worked through all of the detail, and that's what meant that when we were running in the real world, we were quite successful. And I think that's the real thing that people have a challenge with, is distilling down to the simplicity that they really need. I mean, it's the great Churchill quote, "I'd have written you a shorter letter if I had more time." Requirements are like that as well. You've really got to cut them back so that you're really building the thing that matters.
I love that. I've never heard that quote before. I like that one. A couple of years ago, you joined Judo Bank as CTO. I guess what I'm interested here is how much of that role has been externally focused as a CTO developing product, and how much of that's been kind of internally focused more as your traditional CIO?
So judo's a fascinating story for anyone who is not familiar with judo. 7 years ago, the Australian government said they wanted to encourage more banks. So they gave out a series of banking licenses. And they went to some companies that sadly are no longer with us, Zinja, 86400, and so forth. Judo is the only one left standing. And it's the only one left standing, I think, because it has a very focused premise. Good bankers have good relationships with business customers. They're purely a business lender. But it's bankers have good relationships. You don't automate relationships. Bankers make good decisions. You don't remove them from the equation. You give them better data and inform them, which means that it's not an e-commerce play or a full fintech play. It's not about AI-driven data warehousing and so forth. It's about human enablement. And everything that's in judo's DNA is about human enablement, about better relationships, better insights, better servicing. So it starts a fundamentally different proposition to a lot of banking these days. Straight through processing, super important because we want easy sign up. but we do not want automated sign up. We want you to be engaged. We want to have a relationship with you because that's the core of the business. Now, for full context, 3 of the big 4 have NPSs, Net Promoter Scores, in their business bank that are 5 or below. Judo's is 75.
You're right.
I didn't know it went above 50. I literally, when I joined Judo, I thought NPS stopped at 50. I thought that's how the metric worked. No, Judo's was 75 at the last reported numbers. And that's because of the relationship-focused nature of the business. So as a CTO joining Judo, there's a really interesting kind of ask. And the problem set that I was given was Judo as a startup, and it was only 5 years old when I joined. Judo as a startup has done everything it needed to do to go live. It grabbed a core banking system. It bought one off the shelf. Wasn't good. Didn't do what they needed to do. Wasn't configured the way you would want it to do, but it worked. Okay, go. Do loans. Excellent. And that sort of logic went all the way through. General ledger. Oh, we're going to just take that package. It doesn't speak to that. We manually move the data around. But we're just going to go. We need asset finance. Same thing. All of their products were, what can I use to go live as fast as possible, as cheaply as possible, but without putting in place the platforms that would allow them to grow. They needed to prove the business. And part of that was when the original founders went and raised money, their investors said, we love your hypothesis, but we're not going to give you money to build a tech stack. We're going to give you money to lend to people to prove your business.
Yep.
So you have to do the IT stack for less than X.
Yep.
And so my ask was, without spending any more money than is already in the slate, can you please build out the infrastructure for us to be able to grow and be a long-term stable business? So that was the ask.
Yep.
Which is a fantastic challenge to be given. Very, very clear kind of headline statement, but what does that involve? And so when I joined, I kind of looked at it as a 2-stage process. Year 1 for me was, let's do the strategy. Let's understand what's there. What's there from people. Let's understand what's there from tooling. Let's understand what's there from systems, and work out what is good enough for the next couple of years and what's not. What do we need to change? What do we need to adjust? Where do we need to build capability? So we did some insourcing. So I actually built out an engineering team. We built out our own Salesforce team, for example. So we bring those in place. And then how do we bring the current team on the journey and skill them up to be able to get ready for this next year? And that next year is then the full transformation. And in year 2 of my journey, in 1 year, we selected and implemented a new core banking platform and migrated from one to the other, from old to new.
Yep.
So literally less than 12 months. That's less time than it took, say, Zinja to do it when they were a brand new bank with no customers. We put in a new ERP platform, so general ledger, all the finance processes and so forth. Same 12-month period. We put in a new CRM platform, new workflow capability, rebuilt a whole lot of the custom capability that was already in place in the organization from the early days to really embed what made Judo unique. So we took all of that and really industrialized that and made it strong, secure componentry that would be reliable for the future. Redid the entire engineering framework and went from a quarterly release structure to a monthly, and could actually move to fortnightly, but we chose not to. And increased all the quality and without asking for any more money. So doing all that inside the same envelope. That transformation, that 2-year piece, that was the distillation of every lesson I ever learned running a startup.
Yeah.
Because everything about that was, what is the minimum thing that I really need to do here to meet my strategic objectives? And what are my strategic objectives? And my strategic objectives aren't what you think they are, because I'm trying to make sure that I've got the infrastructure to run a bank for the next 5 or 10 years. And it involved a whole lot of kind of philosophical change, which is quite different to how you would normally think about them. But I'll give you one very simple example, very different way of thinking about it. I hate the concept of tech debt.
Okay.
Tech debt's very prevalent as a thought process in our industry. I think it's bordering on self-delusion. So for this project, what we said was, there is no tech debt. There is no coming back and fixing this tomorrow. What we go live with, unless the next step to clean it up or enhance it is already funded as part of this project, assume it will never, ever be fixed. Culturally, assume it will never be fixed. And so people would get to something and they'd go, oh, we can live with this for a year. I said, no, there is no year. You're either living with that forever or we're going to take the week and fix it. Oh, we should fix it now. What do you know? Really, it's only 2 days' work. But if you'd come back a year later, it's a $500,000 project. And it's that sort of thing. That's the startup mentality. I can't afford to come back tomorrow and do this. So I either do it right or I never do it. And it's those sorts of lessons that let us go into this. And yes, these projects all left with some form of tech debt, but that tech debt is tiny in comparison to what you would have thought it would be. And it was because we took the view of it's now or never. Please expect that it's never going to happen. And it's those sorts of startup lessons that I think any organization can bring in and start to think about differently and really change how you think about delivery. Because one of the things that I wanted as a strategy and the CEO wanted was the ability to say, I'm done investing here. I would now like to move all of my investment dollars over here to do something different. But that only works if the entire infrastructure has been designed with the idea of, no, legitimately, we're going to stop here and move over here. Now, people talk about that. Very few people do that. Judo has now done that. And that thinking about that as you design the architecture, I think is a really important thing. How do you support the business strategically in your architecture? And that very much is a startup kind of mentality.
How did you adjust the mindset of the engineering team to move away from that kind of concept of tech debt?
Well, I had to hire the engineering team first, so that was pretty easy. There was no engineering team.
Right.
Everything had been outsourced. So we had a really, really good service management team, some really, really excellent people who were already in place who knew the ins and outs of what we were doing. But we brought in an engineering capability, so brought in a really excellent engineering leader called Lawrence Hunt, who's still at Judo running that area. He then brought in a team of people, but they were all brought in with the idea of there is no engineering team. There is no discipline, there is no skills, there is no standards, there is no framework. We want you to come in and do this. But part of it is we want you to automate everything because we want you to focus purely on value add. So this is where we're at. And so it was a group of people who really wanted to be part of building something solid for the first time without limitations, without tech debt. And so it really created this kind of, through recruitment, a self-selection process of people going, oh yeah, I'm in for that. And you could watch this moment during the process where people would realize just what you were offering them in terms of the playground to experiment with ideas. And people would go from, I want this job to, oh, I want this job. You're like, yep, that's exactly the attitude that we want. So you get on board and you become passionate and you take ownership of it.
Yeah, fantastic. And it sounds there that you've kind of echoes of your experiences there with ANZ in terms of painting the vision.
Yep.
To get people on the bus and clear with which direction it's going and what you expect from those people.
And especially for the team who've been there for a couple of years, the previous direction that they had wasn't about building a bank that would last. The mandate that they had worked to was build a bank that will run, that will let us list, that exists. And I find it fascinating. I always say I look back at some of the decisions that were made in early judo, and I don't think I could have done what they did. I spent enough time in a Big Four. I don't think I would have made some of those decisions. I'd have allowed some of that stuff to happen. But it was absolutely what was required to get that bank to be live.
Yeah.
And they did an amazing, amazing job. And one of the things we had to be careful of was there were people in the company who had been in those original teams. So you couldn't walk in and say, oh, this is all rubbish. We have to replace it all. You have to respect the legacy and the achievements. And those people are still here. And you have to bring them on the journey of what does future judo look like and how do we skill you up to really be part of that, both culturally and technically.
But I guess similar there to your experience at ANZ, you were the new face in town with the mandate to do that.
Yep.
You were kind of part of the next generation of phase 2, let's call it Judo 2.0, whatever.
Yep.
To go to the next level of sustainability and future-proofing the business.
We really called it the transition from startup to scale-up. And as that work has now finished, it's the scale-up. It's the transition from scale-up to operating bank. And that's the language we used inside to really say there were these horizons. And we've gone from one to the other, and now we're out the other side.
And I think clarity of those stages is critical. It helps people understand where they are, the expectations, and what they're aiming for next. We're going to move to the lightning round, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Because we've got to the present day. So I've got a few cards here. I'm going to lay these out for you. And then I'm going to ask you. I say this every time, but I've never worked at Crown. I'm not a croupier. These lack of skills clearly demonstrate. But if you could pick 3 cards at random, and once you have, let's read them out and give us your answer.
Okay. If you could change one thing about your industry, what would it be? Oh, God, that's a deep question. I don't know if I can do that one as a lightning.
That's okay. We'll take a bit more time.
I think one of the things that if you're outside the tech industry and you look at it, it looks like it never stops changing. And if you're inside the industry, it never stops changing either, but we don't seem to account for that in how we think about our people and development. I think as an industry, if I could do one thing, it would be to really inject the idea of continual investment in learning and skills into the teams across every organization. So as an industry, we actually accepted we're in a constant state of renewal, and we lent into that, and we created the opportunity for our people to really do that. One of the things I was most proud about when we were working with some of the new vendor contracts at Judo is we embedded ongoing training into those master contracts so that our vendors would always be coming in to teach us the new things on those contracts, and our people would stay current. And I think there's too many organizations just don't care about that sort of stuff. I'm going to hire you to do the job today, and I expect you to be perfectly skilled, and you're going to stay perfectly skilled. It's like, well, unless I'm actually making room for it, that's rubbish. That's the one thing I think I'd love to see us change.
Yeah, that's great. I often wonder that with, particularly where tech's so contract dominant, whether the responsibility then sits with the contractor to upskill themselves to continue to be viable for the market. And maybe that's a kind of dynamic that we have in this sector.
I think that comes down to how you see the role of contractors. I am not a massive user of contractors on a large scale.
Yeah.
I am a huge fan of internal teams who have the ability to be totally knowledgeable and fully self-dependent when they need to, and then working with partners, and those partners bring expertise. And so working with those partners, you want to see them having internal programs to keep their own staff developed and current and constant, because that's the reason you're bringing them in, not because you've got 4 experts today, but that you're going to have 4 experts always.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so that's how I select my partners, is that sort
and the
of
internal
discussion.
team kind of vicariously learns through
not vicariously, explicitly.
Explicitly.
I want to make that part of contracts. Knowledge transfer and skill up should always be something that if we're bringing in experts, they should have a contractual legal responsibility to leave our people better than the day they arrived.
Interesting. Okay, like it. What do we got next?
How have you navigated career transitions, and were there any risks you took that turned out to be particularly rewarding? Well, the number one career transition was leaving big banking and going into a startup. That was a complete and utter roll of the dice. It could have been an absolute disaster, and I walked in really thinking, I don't care. I don't mind what the outcome is, because the worst I'm going to walk away from is an amazing experience. So for the rest of my career, when I have an interview that says, tell me of a time when you've had to deal with challenging circumstances, I could say, well, there was this one time I had a startup that went under, and I didn't. We didn't go there. That's still going. And so I think that transition for me, I was incredibly fortunate that I had a supportive partner at home who was willing to let me roll the dice, and was willing to go down that. And she and the kids were amazingly supportive through that. But navigating that in, I went in with eyes wide open, trying to get every opportunity I could, and with the mindset of there is nothing that is beneath me. I will do whatever it takes to make this succeed. And it was an amazing success. I loved so much about that. I ended up working with banks all over the world and understanding the nature of the different banking markets and what they're all trying to achieve. I learned a lot about myself as a leader and as a member of a leadership team of a small organization. I learned an awful lot about fundraising. And I got, weirdly, the thing I never knew I wanted to do until we did it, which was walk down Sand Hill Road where all the VCs are in the States and do the pitches.
Yeah, right.
I never knew that it was a life goal to go and pitch Sequoia. It lasted 30 minutes. They were a hard no.
Yeah.
But I never knew it was a life goal to go and pitch my ideas to Sequoia until I did it. And I walked out going, that was amazing.
Yeah.
And the CEO walked out going, "That was horrible, like hard no." And I'm like, "We just walked out of Sequoia.
Yeah.
They listened to us."
Yeah.
And so with that positive attitude of no matter what happens here, this is going to be a good experience. I think for me, that was an easy transition to make.
Yeah, interesting. I loved listening to or seeing as well, just hearing your passion there about that pitch. It's often something I talk with tech scale-ups about more so than tech startups in terms of hiring. And I often say, if you're going into bat to get funding, you have a pitch deck and you know how to pitch. That should be the same pitch when you're trying to hire people, by the way. But that often gets overlooked. And I meet way too many tech scale-ups that say, "Oh, we've got a great culture." What does great mean? We go for beers on a Friday. It's not. They can't define the culture. They can't define the pitch for why someone should come and join that business. But to me, it's no different to the same pitch for getting funding.
No, I think a VC wants to see that you have a good idea that you're passionate about. A staff member who's interviewing, they should see that you're passionate about your business as well. You're passionate about being a leader, about what you're trying to achieve. They're going to come and try and join you on a journey. They have to want to be there. The days of the IT industry, certainly anything I'm likely to be doing, where it says, I just need someone to sit over here and just, check on the data tapes on a Friday afternoon, that's long gone. Even the people we have in what are seen as the less glamorous parts of our industry, the guys who are doing after-hour service management calls or internal help desk, they are part of servicing end customers. They're part of our customer journey. They have to be both feel engaged with the overall mission, but also they need to be passionate about their part of the world, because they can make or break an entire organization just as fast as an engineer building new code can.
Absolutely.
And so I think it's behoved all of us as leaders to try and exude that personality and take everyone on that journey. They don't all need to join the cult and be super rah-rah, but everyone needs to understand, we're doing this because we really want to, we love it, and it's a lot of fun.
Well, they may not be getting out their checkbook, if they exist these days, but they may not be making a financial investment in this new entity, in this scale-up, but their actual time, their career, that's the same investment.
It is,
I believe, that they're making.
Same
and you're asking someone to make that same leap of faith as you would someone with someone else's money they're spending to invest in you. So it's just interesting. I think much more about recruitment. And the reason I talk about scale-ups, by the way, rather than startups, is I think if you look at the statistics, most startups hire through their own network of people they know. It's when they get to the Series B, Series D, C, D funding, and they suddenly have to step into the unknown of people they've never met before. And they have to entice them into the organization. And fundamentally, that hiring is going to probably then make or break the organization in terms of whether it continues to be a success or not.
And scale up, to be honest, startup, everyone's on board for a journey that involves, no money, living on noodles. We can't do anything. We're totally restricted.
That's right.
And we're all in this working 24 hours a day, and everyone's on board with that. Scale-ups where you have people who have families who need the weekends off. It's a different thing, but you still need commitment and focus and passion. Scale-ups, I think scale-ups are hard. I think starting the business is easy, but I think actually getting it operational, that's the hard bit.
Correct. Yeah, I agree.
Number three. What's one piece of sage advice you'd give to someone starting out in your field? Say yes to every unlikely and unusual offer. If I look back at my career, it has always been because I would take on odd jobs that I would end up being successful. I was at an insurance firm. They said, we're doing a merger. Who wants to go to Sydney to be part of the M&A team? I'm like, I have no idea what that is. Yeah, absolutely. Send me to Sydney for 3 months. This sounds great. I don't know what this is. I'll give it a crack. When I was in the States, we just won a contract to do the design for the software that runs all of the Honda dealerships in America, for all of the motorbike and power tools dealerships. Sure, I'm a car guy. I've never ridden a motorbike. I know nothing about this space. That sounds awesome fun. I will go and do that. Step one, I need to go and become a licensed motorbike dealer. Okay, also weird. I will do that. And then every opportunity ANZ, most of them, they look great on the resume. You look back, it's a completely logical set of roles from one to the other. But most of them at the time were not. They were roles where I would jump around. I did something unusual in the bank. I worked across every division. I worked on retail, institutional, group, and international. People don't do that. Well, you didn't used to anyway. At the Big Four, you were a lifer in a division. And so to me, it's all about saying yes and picking up these unusual things. If they are good, if it's a new skill, it's advancement, just say yes, give it a crack. And providing you can see something interesting at the end of it, go for it. Here's
a question for you then. We tend to regret the things that we said no to. Mm-hmm. Do you have any career regrets?
I only have one, which is more of a personal one. At one stage, there was a conversation about would I go and lead one of the offshore teams, and we ended up saying no only because my wife got pregnant at the time, right. So our first child. And it's the only thing that I regret is that I think that would have been an amazing experience, both personally for the two of us, but also professionally to go and spend 2 years living and working in India. Yeah. Now I spent 3 and 4 months a year working with the Indian teams for years, but I was always a fly in, fly out, and I really wish I'd had the opportunity to go and really live and be part of that community. Now I have no idea what that would have done to the rest of my career. Yeah. But that's the one regret. But it's the only regret.
Son, daughter is the outcome of that pregnancy?
Son.
So do you remind him of this?
He is aware. He is aware of this. And hilariously now is starting to do their own planning for university and has got the assumption that they will do part of the university overseas.
Oh, well,
because they don't want to be stuck in Australia forever.
Yeah. What are you most proud of in your career?
So I can't get away from the fact I built a company and I built a product that still exists. Like, it's a huge source of personal pride that we did that, and that it's being used by quite literally tens of millions of people. Like, there is no way you can get past that on your ego of, right, this is something that if I went into the countries where the product's been used, that's an amazing sense of pride. So having built that from nothing, that I'm incredibly proud of. But ultimately, what I tend to be most proud of is the people that I work with and who I help develop, who go on to be better leaders themselves. I love what technology can achieve. Get very passionate about the idea of us being servants to the people who use what we build. You don't build the technology for its own sake, you build it for a purpose. And so I love that alignment with purpose. But more importantly is getting that set of values and the passion for that and getting other people infused with that, and then helping make them better technologists so that they become passionate about what we build and developing them to be better people, better technologists. That's what I'm actually most proud about. Some of the people through my career who I've helped who've gone on to have amazing careers in other industries as well. Really, it comes down to those people. I love working with them. I've loved seeing them flourish. And that will always be kind of the true drive at the end of the day.
What, in terms of inspiration, what do you kind of read? What do you listen to? What recommendations have you got?
I'll take all the things, please, for $500.
I love Jeopardy too.
Yeah, so I'm interested in everything. So I'm currently doing a year-long ethics fellowship in ethical leadership. So it's called the Vincent Fairfax Fellowship. And I'm doing it with a cohort of amazing leaders from across corporates and civil service. And we literally sit and talk about ethical problems and frameworks. And it's everything from classic ethics through modern applied ethics. And I love that. And I will bring that back with passion into what I do.
What motivated you to... I did read about that actually on your LinkedIn, and it was a question I had earlier, and somehow I managed to miss it. But I looked at that, I thought that was incredible. But what inspired you to go down that path?
I'm always interested in ways that I can... It's a kind of an unusual thing. I'm always interested in being a richer person, in having a better, wider understanding of the world around us and how to think. I'm never going to be technically exceptional at the things we build. That has come and gone for me. So to be a better leader and a better person, I want to consume more knowledge from outside my domain that is applicable. And so about 10 years ago, I did a philosophy course sponsored by ANZ through a thing called the Krenliner Institute, which they still run. It's called the Executive Colloquium. I recommend it to anyone. And that's a week of taking core philosophy from the last 2,000 years and really workshopping that as a group and help expanding the way you think to be a more moral person. And that's fascinating. I love that. And so last year, I was looking around for something to do as a bit of professional development. I've had a couple of cracks at doing a PhD and it's never stuck. And so I thought I want to do something else that's got less of than a 6-year commitment. And so I went back and saw the Ethics Fellowship, and I spoke to someone who did it a couple of years ago. And I'm like, that sounds right up my alley. I'm going to go and do that.
It's so relevant as well to where we are right now in the world of tech.
It's hugely relevant. I think the implications that we can have on society are getting really dangerous if we don't think through the implications. But I think also as leaders, if you're on an organization that's building AI, there is a point where people liken it to the Industrial Revolution, but it's a little bit different to that because in our case, we're asking our engineers to knowingly build the tools that will put them out of a job. So how do you feel about that?
Yeah.
My eldest is an artist. Their art has been stolen. So every time I look at the Adobe AI tool, that is built 100% on stolen artwork, including theirs. What do they do with that? Their career as an artist is over before it's begun. And they know it. And so that's hugely problematic. What's the ethical responsibility we have as an IT industry? Yeah. And so those sorts of conversations, I think most people are not well enough informed or educated about how to think about ethics for us to be able to talk about those things. And I think that's a failing on us as leaders. And so I want to be able to have those conversations and lead others in having those conversations because I think they're massively important for us as an industry, if not a society.
Yeah. And it is... God, I'm overflowing with thoughts now. I discussed this with Kendra Vance, if you know Kendra.
No.
So Kendra was previously with Xero and Seek and a bunch of other places. Super smart lady. She actually worked in physics, PhD at Los Alamos. So she blew my mind when we got talking about data and AI and so forth. But we were talking about the ownership of data and the ethical, where does that sit?
Yep.
Who owns data? And somehow we got talking about chocolate. It's very clear who owns the chocolate bar once you bought it from the shop. But with your data, it's trying to use that as a kind of metaphor when it's out there.
I think most people have lost sight of actually just how bad the data piece is. I mean, you think about what happened a couple of years ago with the data leakage that was coming out, Facebook data and so forth for the elections. But I first worked on an election database 30 years ago. The data that I had 30 years ago, which is incredibly rudimentary. We knew everything about people who were in electorates, how they thought about issues and so forth. You fast forward to now, the data that's there, I think people just don't appreciate how absolutely kind of invasive some of that insight is and how that is going to get used. I think that's a real challenge that we're going to have to deal with in the next couple of years.
It's huge. And it's actually interesting because it's a good example of what we were talking right at the start of this conversation about going to university and essentially studying for jobs that didn't even exist.
Yep.
And I think that's just speeding up, right? We're continually facing new situations that no one ever thought that we'd ever get to an ethical issue around AI and data, and these conversations would be relevant. So we're constantly we're catching up really quick with this stuff before it's kind of happening to us.
Absolutely. So I look at that ethical course and I say that's the sort of thing that I think more people should be doing. That's an education that I think is more important. But likewise, last week I read a book around the hospitality industry that was, to me, Unreasonable Hospitality, written by the maitre d' of 11 Madison Park, so best restaurant in the world, about their approach to being unreasonably hospitable and what that meant and how you get there and the culture of the focus of the customer. Yeah. And I loved that book. I've now recommended that's going to become mandatory leading for my leadership team. I think that sort of looking outside of our own disciplines to where we can learn other things is incredibly important for us as professionals. And I think anyone who kind of says we should stay in our lane, I think that's a problem at the leadership level. I think that's a problem. We have to understand the broader world. We should always be seeking that more education. So for me, it's everything from philosophy to design to hospitality to aeronautics to wherever else I can learn something interesting.
Yeah, great. Just keep learning.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Look, Euan, thank you for your time today. It's been really, really interesting, really insightful. I've loved hearing about your journey and where it's taken you, and actually can't wait to see what happens next. So I think it's going to be something pretty cool.
My pleasure. Thank you, Anton. It's been great.
Cheers. Thank you for listening to Tales from Tech Titans, and be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcast. If you'd like to get more insights about tech careers, then check out the Ember, that's EMMBR LinkedIn page for the latest updates, articles, and engaging discussions.